if you'll just start by saying your name, and then we'll be ready to. Oh, whoops! I gotta slow down. Got in such a hurry trying to get back and get that battery. I have to slow down. Okay, so if you'll start by just saying your name.
Linder McNeely.
Okay. Then go ahead.
Linda, I want this afternoon for us to talk about our memories of Oxford and the campus and what we remember it being when we were children. The Grove has always been a center point for a lot of us, but it did not have the heavy use at that time that it came to have. I don't ever remember people parking in the Grove for a football game when I was a child.
I don't remember such either. I do remember that it was always a popular picnic area, but as far as the parking, it came much later, as I remember.
Yes, I think so too. It was a good play space for children, and all of us on campus or not felt pretty free to roam around all over the campus and into the academic buildings and wherever we wanted to go, and nobody ever stopped us or told us not to.
I remember that very well as well. And when the alumni house opened, we were in school at that time at the University High School, which is across the street, across the bridge, and we were delighted to have an alternative to the lunchroom at the high school, and we were just as welcome at the alumni house as students and faculty.
And it was definitely an improvement from our lunchroom at the high school.
Yes, it was.
It didn't have a whole lot to offer. Well, go on back to the high school days and tell me any highlights or anything you remember of interest during those years for you.
Well, it was just terribly exciting for me. I enjoyed school, and I met so many people that I had no idea at the time that they would be a part of my life for years to come. And it was just a real pleasure to be able to meet those people and to be associated with people that were associated with the university and would continue to be for many years afterwards. I'm reminded of Lee McCarty was a science teacher at University High School, and I had a couple of science courses, and we remain good friends. I visited with Lee last fall, and I enjoy that. That's one of the things about Oxford that's always fascinated me is that we were just as welcome on campus as if we belonged there, even when we were in high school.
Well, and I think from the university's point of view, we did belong there because, of course, the university was running the high school, too.
Mm-hmm.
And Lee was one of the more colorful teachers. I had one class from him, and I don't think I took it until my last year. It was just a requirement I had to get out of the way. Well, of course, my father had taught biology for years, and I kind of scoffed at Lee because I said, you know, I know a lot more biology than this man does. He sort of stayed 2 pages ahead of us in the textbook, and that was the way he taught it. Are there other teachers there or students that you remember? Of course, we had the student teachers as well.
Right. We had I had classes under Dr. Harrington, and Evans Harrington, and he taught me an awful lot about things other than English. He was a really good friend of mine and a person that introduced me to a lot of the world that I didn't know existed at that time, and I treasured his friendship for a long time. And you know, we had a teacher who taught social studies, Mrs. Shaw.
Oh, yes.
And she was just a princess of a lady, and I enjoyed her friendship for as long as she taught and was around here.
We had had so many outstanding teachers, beginning from the time we started there in the 7th grade. I've heard other people who remember that 7th grade beginning as being somewhat intimidating because the school was so big and such a different scale than what any of us had experienced at the elementary school.
Sure. Mr. Smith, Lynn Smith, he lived in Water Valley and commuted here.
Yes.
He taught English for a number of years there, and he was also a very good friend of mine, as well as being one of my favorite teachers. He was that kind of person.
He was good.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And I still remember a colorful character. I remember her as that. It was Miss Santa Tackett.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Who taught us English, I guess maybe at the first and second level in high school, a little before Smith.
Mm-hmm. Miss Tackett had, I can remember very well, she, on the first day of class, she would ask us all to individually stand and give our names and any family members that had been students there in years past. And one of my older sisters was a student there a few years before me, and I told her, the class, that introduced my sister as being a former student. And then a cousin that was a little rowdy. He was not a really Miss Tackett's idea of an ideal student, and she got really upset when she found out that I was related, and she couldn't separate my cousin from me for a long time, and we had a lot of visits about that.
I see. I remember her as having a room full of rowdies when I had her class, and I don't know how she ever kept control
I
of
don't
it
either.
or put up with it,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of them weren't paying any attention and could have cared less.
Right.
They didn't have any real interest in it. And I remember Dr. Nelson as being so influential in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and learning a lot from him too.
I also remember from University High School, the atmosphere at the football games, how cold it was down in that playing area that we.
Cold. I was like going down into an ice box.
Mm-hmm. I think now I look back on that, and I think sometimes they give on the Memphis weather, they give the temperature in Oxford, and I think it must have been taken down at the old football field, the baseball field now. I think it was the coldest place in the area.
And we didn't have anything enclosed down there. I mean, you were out in the elements.
That's right. No roof. Excuse me.
No, just it was all pretty raw. But we did all right with it.
We did fine. We sure did.
We talked about being a child on campus and how free the place was and welcoming to children who just went about their business. There was no organized anything for children. You just made up whatever you and your friends wanted to do. Tell me your memories of some of those years.
Well, we were welcome at the university swimming pool.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, Oxford did not have a pool
No.
of any kind unless you knew someone who had a pool at their home, which there was very few at that time.
Yeah.
But we were, I think they charged them a dime to swim for a couple of hours, and that was probably not enough to pay for disinfecting where we'd been, but we enjoyed that on a daily basis. And I remember also, I can't remember, it was after World War II, but I can't remember just what time frame. I believe on Wednesday night, I believe it was Wednesday, they had a free movie in the Grove. And there was not really a stage at that point, but they had put some sort of a facility there so that they could put up a screen. And they had movies there, weather permitting, on I believe it was Wednesday nights, and we always enjoyed that. It was just, I don't know, it was just some way to get out on campus. That seemed to be we were just drawn to the campus because of all that it had to offer. I can remember as boys and camping out. We camped out in some of the areas around town that are now, the subdivision that I live in was once a place that we camped out. And we'd get on our bicycles at night and ride over to the gym. And the gym would be wide open, and we could go in, and we couldn't box, but they had a boxing ring. It was a place to just go and hang out, and the basketball practice court was open to the public, and we just did a lot of things. They had weights for weightlifting and the things that gyms normally have, but it was just open to us boys like we were students there. And I was always impressed that we had the free reign to just go where we wanted.
That pretty well tells it all, because I have exactly the same feeling. You could pretty much go where you wanted, and if you wanted to see something specific, generally there's some faculty member around who would take you and show you.
That's very true, very true.
I know Claire Smith told me she, as so many people, the source of curiosity were the cadavers, of course. She wanted to go see that. Well, Dr. Pancratz took her and showed her. And, for him to take time, take this little girl just to satisfy her curiosity, when she told me that story, I was not really surprised, but that was very typical of what somebody would do.
Now, and after you and I talked, and I thought a lot about what we might talk about, and the cadavers came to my mind as well, except that I didn't get a tour. It was the thing with the boys that the old building that the med school was in had a huge basement. And the front of the building was almost at street level, but the back was really, it may have been a couple of floors off the ground. And the way the building was built, there was I think they called it coping. It was a concrete belt thing that went around the building, and you could walk on it if you were kind of daredevilish, and we'd go over there late in the afternoon as just a group of boys, uninvited, and we'd get on that walkway and walk around the building to the back, where we could look in the windows, and we could see the cadavers in through the windows, but that's as close as we ever got to a tour.
What if you'd asked somebody, probably would have
taken it right in.
And shown you around. My first encounter was when Alter Galt was trying to get through medical school. I'm not sure she ever finished. You know who I'm talking about?
I do.
Yeah, I thought you would. And she was working on a cadaver up in that lab when I was maybe 8, 9 years old.
Right.
But I'd sort of grown up around that environment. I didn't think anything about it. I just went in and talked to her about whatever was on my mind, something to do with our Cub Scouts. But as you said, everything was accessible. Nothing was off limits.
Ms. Galt was a tremendous scout leader, as I remember. I remember that there was a meeting place, a Girl Scout hut that was built. I think it was named in her honor.
It was back behind the public library down in that area.
I remember.
Well, she was a wonderful addition to our lives and to the university's life and the town too. But I don't think there are probably that many people that know who she was or remember her. She did take up the time with us. Giggly, silly little girl. She used to ride us around an old car that she had that had one of its back doors missing. Well, people would have a fit now. We didn't think anything about it.
True.
They, of course, didn't have seat belts or any such thing as that. but we went on about our business. Were there any men in your life when you were a boy that were a male equivalent of alter age and dealing with boys and their activities?
I never was a scout, but after my family moved into Oxford from the county, I attended First Baptist Church, and the Sunday school, where I didn't attend church that often. We found a way to skip out after Sunday school,
Yeah.
but I had a Sunday school teacher whose name was Floyd Muse, M-U-S-E. And he was the manager of the J.B. Carpenter service station, and it was a large place. They sold appliances and did car service and sold gasoline. And Mr. Muse was the manager of that.
I see.
And he was a wonderful person, just a really, really down-to-earth man that would take us on field trips. And he'd take us to Memphis back in those days. That's when the wrestling became really popular, and they had it downtown in a location they called Ellis Auditorium.
Oh, I remember the old Auditorium.
Right, and that's where they had wrestling.
Yeah, the opera also performed there. I mean, they were diverse.
Right. But Mr. Muse would take us there, and he was just a real, for a country boy moved into town, he was just the epitome of a fine leader.
Yeah.
And besides being a good Sunday school teacher as well.
Well, let's switch off to another direction that you've reminded me of, because I knew your roots were east of town originally, going toward New Albany. And I know that you and Tricia Young were working together, trying to put something together some years ago having to do with what had been Faulkner's farm. He didn't live there, but land that he owned. And I remember seeing the proposal that Tricia had put together. And anything you remember about that you would like to share, I'd like to know about?
Well, it was a great interest for Patricia and myself. We had aspirations that we might entice the university to be interested in a living history museum on that property. The university had acquired Mr. Faulkner's nephew, Jimmy, had acquired that farm, and he had sold most of the land to different individuals, and the university had acquired 20 acres that included the old house and the what remained of the barn. And that's what Patricia and I wanted to develop into a living history museum. And we had a lot of interest and very little money. And that was the university just was not interested at that time. I talked to Ann Abbott just a short time ago, and we both agreed that maybe in another year, another generation, that the thinking might change along that line. But that was a real interest to the both of us. We could visualize it. It was just happening, and it was that close.
Yeah. But it's always a question of having enough resources, isn't it?
That's right. If you have the right interest, the resources are usually available from somewhere. But we lacked the interest on the part of the people that made decisions, as well as money. And with no interest and no money, you don't have much but a dream. And
yeah, a dream that's not going to go anywhere.
That's right.
And it's too bad, because it was a good idea, but not to be. We still don't really have a place that focuses mainly on Oxford history. And we are creating at the Belfry a small museum component in that building that will focus mainly on history in the black community. The general history of the Oxford as a town, we really don't have that. I know Patricia also pursued wanting space in the courthouse, but that did not, nothing ever came of
Mhm.
that. And I suspect that when Miss Kate created the Mary Viewing Museum, that she likely meant for it to be that, and not what it has become with its more general collections, according to what the university thinks it wants, or the people who are running the museum think they want. But I don't think we have any place that focuses on Oxford history as I see it.
No, I don't know. I don't know of any place, any such place. And when you mentioned that, it reminded me of the hallway into the old Oxford Elementary School.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember those artifacts and displays that were on the walls of the main hallway going in?
Until you mentioned it, I had not remembered it. Would you remind it?
You know, things that I can remember very well. My first day of school there, I was fascinated by all of those things that I had no idea where they came from, but I could stand there for hours and enjoy look at those and reading the descriptive cards. And I think a lot of that was actually from the Gillespie family that had been missionaries in different parts of the world, but it was fascinating to a kid.
Yeah, and this was Dr. Gillespie that was principal?
He was,
Yeah, I remember him very distinctly.
I've often wondered what became of those artifacts and those items that were on display there. I wonder if they would be a nice addition to some museum.
I have no idea, and I don't know who would know. It could be, this is the sort of thing that Will Lewis tends to know.
Mm-hmm.
He's the only person I know that keeps up with, in such detail with Oxford history.
Mm-hmm.
He might have some idea, but no, I don't know what's become of all those things either. And I did not know that Dr. Gillespie had been a missionary. I just never knew that.
I'm not sure that he was, but it seems that he was from, I believe, a family that had been missionaries. And another family name connected there were Eklunds. Do you recall that name?
I do know the name, but I don't know more than that.
There was a boy that was in school at one time or another in my grammar school years. His name was Dick Eklund, and he was, I think, a nephew of Dr. Gillespie, and maybe from that family that had been missionaries. That's been so long, my memory fades on some of that.
Yeah. The missionary children that I remember in my childhood, both were older than me, but became very active when their family moved back to Oxford, their home area, and that was the Beanlands. And many of us started going to the Presbyterian Sunday school because what the Beanland boys had to share was way beyond any other Sunday school teachers that we knew. They had 18-foot-long snake skins and other things that were way more interesting at the time than what was in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you ever got to their Sunday school classes, but several of us did.
Mm-hmm. I remember the name. I remember that they were a big family of missionaries.
Yes, they were. And then their mother continued so active on campus in the religious activity, the various churches that had their own person on campus. Mrs. Beeman was one of those.
At their home there on South Lamar,
yes,
there was a sign beside the driveway for years. I believe it had a phrase like "done moving" or something. That was what they called their place.
Yeah. I guess she moved all she wanted to, though I really thought they were in the Congo the whole time, but I could be mistaken. I just don't know about that. Well, tell me, anything else that you want to tell me about in your memories of Oxford and the university?
Well, I can remember, I tell my children and have told them for years, one of the fascinating things that I remember about the years right after World War II was over, on University Avenue, almost parallel with South 18th Street that goes from where Walgreen is along
Yes.
there.
Mm-hmm.
That was a cotton field.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember that there was one of the men, a veteran from the war. I guess he didn't have a job, and he had an airplane. It was a Piper Cub, a little yellow plane that they've almost become extinct now. But he had a portion of that cotton field that they plowed it up when they got through with the cotton and smoothed it up. And he had a landing strip there that he landed his plane. And for $1, you could get a ride around town. It would be about 15 or 20-minute flight over town, and that was my first airplane ride. And to look at that area now, you'd never know that a plane ever landed in there, but that was a regular thing. It went on for a month or two, and he moved on, but that was one of the unusual things. That in the city limits, I can remember coming to town with my dad, and we always came in from the country the same way, the same street. And then he did his business around the square, which was all there was to Oxford then. And then we went back out the same street. And I can remember asking my dad how long it would take to drive all the way through Oxford, because I'd only seen one side of it. But I can remember those days. In the city limits were actually on South Lamar at Beanland Drive. We were talking about the Beanlands. And that's before you even get to the bypass.
Oh, yeah, about several blocks.
And then the North Lamar was down near where Handy Andy is now, the barbecue place, and the railroad track on the west side, and near Walgreen on University Avenue, that little creek down there was, you know, it was really a small town.
Yes, it was. The growth didn't come along until a great deal later.
That's right. After World War II, my uncle, Harvey McNeely, owned quite a bit of land on West Jackson, as we know it now, West Jackson, in the area of Walmart. And he built a building and put in a drive-in. We didn't know what a drive-in was around Oxford, but he knew that it was, people ridiculed him a little bit. His friends really had a field day with his sense of humor over that thing. And why are you building a restaurant 2 miles out in the country? It's 2 miles to town. And he said, well, you'll see. One day we'll see. And then, people fell in love with the automobile when they got where they could buy them, when they were on the market, and they could buy them. And then they bought their cars, and they loved to drive. Gasoline was cheap, and they had a lot of time, and they drove out to his restaurant, and that became what we remember later as the Ole Miss Drive-In. And later on, he sold it to a Mr. McMillan that ran it for a long time. And Uncle Harvey had the restaurant. Across the street, he had a skating rink. And then there was also a service station, and he built a building for a service station. And that's how that West Jackson actually got the beginning to development out there, was his little community that he started with there.
And before that, there'd only been 2 or 3 little small grocery general store. The Tidwells had one that I remember.
Right at the end of Fraternity Row.
Yes.
What was then. It's been changed now. But
they moved it a bit.
Right.
And then the place across the street from them my friend Preston Taylor remembers that. He lived down in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And he just remembered they had the best milkshakes and whatever else was part
Mm-hmm.
of his boyhood memories. But there were just those 2, maybe 3 places there and nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Later on, my uncle sold the land to the Ewings, the Ewing family. There was 2 brothers that put in the trailer park, Ewing Trailer Park.
Oh, yeah.
And that was, Uncle Harvey didn't see the value or what could be done with flood control at that time, and he sold that to them because he didn't feel he could put a permanent building on that, the way that little stream flooded. And I look at all of that,
Yeah.
you know, back toward the Home Depot and all those other buildings
Yes.
now. And they've done an awful lot with the flood control problem there. But
Well, they've gotten it under control
Mhm.
compared to what existed before. At least pretty much under control, I think they do. Well, many people can't believe what you and I remember is a period of time when there basically was nothing out there.
that's right.
You passed the Tidwells and these 2 or 3 other little stores, and that was it.
It was either pasture land or an occasional piece of land that they farmed. I remember, you may remember too, that at one time, it would be in the vicinity of where the Shell gas station on the left, there's a big Shell station there now, but it was a boat factory. They built fishing boats. It was called AMAC, and I don't know if that was for some person's name, but they handmade those boats. They were really sturdy fishing boats, and they did that. Do you remember Ted Combs?
Remember the name,
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the boats.
Yeah, Mr. Combs was involved, and it seemed that there was 2 or 3 men that were involved in that venture. But
Could they sell enough boats to make it work?
well, they did. I think it was just more or less a pastime venture for 2 or 3 men. I'm not sure that it was. They supplied boats, and I don't know if they did it or who actually did the operation, but they rented boats at the different, they called them boat landings back then, at Hurricane Landing and down at Coontown, and then further down, they just rented boats everywhere there was a boat launch area where someone was there that rented boats, and that's where you found most of those boats that were built there.
I see. So the main destination still was the Sardis Lake, because there wasn't anything else that needed that much attention, I guess.
I guess so. I guess.
Not enough to merit having a boat. I mean, most of the little lakes
That's right.
weren't big enough to warrant that.
People didn't, at that time, they were just beginning to have enough free time that they could devote to hobbies like fishing and things of that type. I remember when a common term around town was about fishing cars. Instead of having a truck like they do now, somebody had an old jalopy or an older car. That was his fishing car. That's what he used to go fishing.
Keep all his fishing gear in there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Ready to go. Well, and the cotton fields were scattered. You mentioned the one down here, 18th Street. It was true here in so many southern towns. It was a pattern frequently found that you had cotton fields all over town. Wherever there was space that somebody had decided to cultivate, there would be a cotton field. And Vassar Bishop told me years ago that the land over here between University and Tyler, which her family owned a lot of, in there where all those apartments are beyond Miss Elma Meek's house, going toward the campus, That was a cotton field when she was a child. She
My.
remembers it. But of course, when you and I came along, that had long since gone.
Mm-hmm.
But she remembered that.
The first thing that I can remember in that area was, I'm not sure what local civic clubs met there, but there was seemed like to me there was a club there that was the T-Hound.
T-Hound was the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was run by Miss Ella. Oh, there's so many Miss Ellas. I guess Miss Ella Somerville.
Well, I remember that. Almost across the street from the museum.
Yeah, just down the hill a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
down by that little stream that used to flow through there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a regular restaurant in the sense of being open at set times every day. It was more by an arrangement for a particular function of some
Mm-hmm.
kind. As
Right.
I remember.
That's the way I remembered. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I remember it being, I thought, a very lovely place.
I was there a time or two, and I remember it as being a very pleasant place.
Yeah, I remember that too. And then I remember when she went out of business, that she was selling a lot of things. And my mother went, and she took me with her, and I saw a platter I wanted. And why this 9-year-old or whatever I was wanted this platter, but I think she was selling it for $1, and I want you to know I have and use that platter to this day. Came with a T-Hound. And I know so many people a little older than we are who have memories of various functions that they went to there.
Mm-hmm.
Frequently called a tea dance, which I think really just meant it was in the afternoon rather than at night.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was a very popular place at the time.
You know, we were mentioned the museum a few minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the highlights of my years at the grammar school, particularly. We about every semester, one of our classes would go on a field trip over to the museum, and that was a fascination for me. I came up in a real country school, and we didn't get to do field trips. And when we moved into Oxford, I was able to be a part of so many things that I had not had an opportunity before, the museum being one of them. That was always a favorite place of mine.
And the museum had several things of interest to children, as
Mm-hmm.
I remember. To little girls in particular, they had a doll collection.
I remember that.
Thought just splendid, and in our later years complained bitterly when they moved those dolls out of the center of things. They're still there, and they're on display, I think, now as you go down the hallway to the office wing of the museum. They're down that hallway, but they're not. They were prominently in the middle of things with
Mm-hmm.
the children, and it was an asset to have something like that.
It definitely was. Yeah, I can remember so vividly I've gotten now that I can't remember exactly what it was, but I can remember the excitement that it brought when we were told that we were going to the museum tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or we had to bring slips. I don't think we had to bring a permission slip to go on a field trip back then. Now you'd have to have a big long document to be able to take those kids out like that, but we certainly enjoyed it when we could.
Well, I don't remember anything except we just all went.
Mm-hmm. Different day and a different time.
Yeah, and I think Mrs. Rowland was probably still running the museum.
I think so.
As she did for years.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, anyway, it was a nice asset for kids to have something like that, because most little towns did not
That's right.
have anything comparable. Well, tell me anything else you'd like to add as we begin to wind up here.
I just, about Oxford and the university and the connection, I just feel very privileged to have been raised up in this community. Over the years, I've never moved away but once. I worked in Jackson for about a year, and I came back to Oxford. Mm-hmm. And I had several opportunities to leave a couple of companies that I was with. I should have left. I should have taken those opportunities, but there was something that just kind of kept me drawn to Oxford. And I've always felt like that this was the best place in the world for me. And I just really consider it a privilege that I got to live here the years that I have.
Well, we really should try to sell this piece of film to the Chamber of Commerce. I think they would be glad to have this testimonial.
I worked for a number of years at Nelson's down on the square, when Mr. Lewis and Mr. Nelson owned the store together. I was working there when Olivia and Will Jr., as I still refer to him as Will Jr., bought an interest in the store when Mr. Nelson retired. And I consider that that was just like a separate education to me. I worked there for about 11 years.
That's a long time.
And you know, I came to appreciate so much what they had added to the community and what the community, some of the things that the community had benefited by Nelson's store having been in Oxford. And all of that together, and I'm very proud of my heritage here in Oxford, my upbringing in Lafayette County, and being a part of Oxford for several years now. I'm very thankful for that.
Well, I think many of us share those sentiments, and think this is a special, special place. And we treasure it and continue to treasure it, and we may have to share it with a few more people than we had ever envisioned, but they feel the same way. It may take them a while to understand that, but they do.
I'll tell you another place in town that I worked at for quite a while when I was a real youngster was the Ole Miss service station. It's no longer there now, but it was on South Lamar at the corner where the big bank on the southeast corner, and that was owned by two families, the Alexanders and the Hookers.
Okay.
And it was the Alexander's name was, he went by initials T.F. Alexander. He had a son and a daughter, and that were in school about the same time we were. Bobby Alexander, and no, he didn't have a daughter. I was thinking about Mary Catherine married Bobby, and she was almost like a member of the family before they were ever married.
I see.
But then the Hookers, they had one daughter, Kay, who later on she was Kay Towery.
You mentioned her.
Right. And then Kay is knowledgeable in all of Oxford and old Oxford, and she'd be an asset to a program like you're working on now, I'm sure.
I need to get to her. I know that for an earlier piece Joe York was doing, I can't even remember the point of it now. I was also interviewed, but Kay was, and her memories of earlier days in Oxford are quite vivid.
But that group, Mr. Hooker and Mr. Alexander, they employed probably at one time maybe 10 or 12 people, and that was a pretty good size employer.
That's a big
in those days.
Yeah.
And they ran their place was more of an institution. They were open 24 hours a day.
Oh, I don't see how they did that in this little town.
But it was a lot of fun to be there and to be associated with those folks. They did a lot for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's true. of this town generally, if you knew the stories
Mhm.
of, to tell. I don't know I don't know many of them, but I do know some
Mhm.
of them. Well, this has been such a pleasure for me to have a chance to remember things with you. And if you think of other things you'd like to add, don't hesitate to call. We'll be glad to make that work.
I'd be happy to.
Okay?
Thank you for thinking about me and allowing me to be a part of the program. I'm anxious to see what all of this turns out to be.
Well, I am too. When people say, where are you going with this? I said, we'll know once we get enough
When we get
material
finished, right.
and we can see what we've got.
It's been a real pleasure to be here.
Well, it has been for me too, Linda. We'll just have to make another time when we can do it without having somebody to photograph all of it.
So you can say that you come at the good stuff then, huh?
Yeah, right. Though if you want to come back and photograph it,
Okay.
we'll be here. Well, I guess that sort of winds up this hour for us.
Okay.
And, I do appreciate you coming.